Okay, my friends, what we're going to figure out now is how to create a margin of error around a statistic. Now, these numbers that we got from our spreadsheet, our Google Sheet, are called statistics because they're based on a sample. They're based on all these times I click, 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 and I was keeping track of data coming in. As you go through Math 105 and potentially beyond, you'll deal with samples quite a bit. Very rarely are you going to know exactly what's going on in a population of numbers. You're going to look at a sample of it. But because you're only looking at a sample of it, that means it's going to be off a little bit. And you control that by a margin of error. Now, the margin of error has a somewhat convoluted formula, but it's a formula, which means we can attack it. Here's how we do it. It starts with the number 2. And we'll study why that number 2 is there in later stat classes. Then it's a big square root. Under the square root is a fraction. The fraction in the numerator, you take the percent of yeses times the percent of no's, and then you divide that by the number of trials that your experiment had. Okay? So all of this information is in your spreadsheet. For example, my percent of yes is the 3.26%. 0.0326. Make sure you write it as a decimal because chances are you won't write 3.26 divided by 100. So write it as a decimal. It's easier to work with. That is 96.97%, which we're going to write as 0.9697. And the number of trials can be gotten by simply adding the two yes totals and no totals together. If you take a look at mine, it ends up being 695. So all we have to do is figure out what that is equal to. And once we figure out what that is equal to, we'll know what the margin of error is, and I'll show you how to use that in the next couple questions. But right now, let's just take a look at how to put this into Google and actually get this margin of error out. Okay, my friends, what we're going to do is we're going to look at how to put this entire formula into Google in one shot. Just because doing this in pieces is too much of a pain in the butt. So what we're going to do is we're going to use good order of operations, and I'm sure you remember that when you have a square root like that, there really is a big parentheses around everything underneath. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply type the number 2 times, and then I'm going to type SQRT. That stands for square root, SQRT. Then I'm going to put left parentheses. Now, this tells us that we're under the square root. Square root, left parentheses, we're now under the square root. Now, under the square root, everything is multiplied and divided, which means I don't actually need those parentheses that I was putting on the board earlier. 0.0326 times 0.9697, and then divide that by 695. And then I press enter. That is my margin of error, about 1.35%. Now that we know that, I'm going to show you how to use it.